So you want to start working on cars, but you don't have any tools and you don't really know where to start. That's right, this is Tool Tuesday. It is Tuesday and we're talking about tools. This is kind of a new segment that we're trying. Basically, we use a lot of tools here on the channel and I want to show you guys which tools I think are the best for certain applications. I want to recommend which tools you should be using for what jobs and also which brands of tools that you should be buying. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. Today we're going to be talking about the top 5 tools that you need to buy if you want to start actually modifying your car. You're probably wondering, why am I qualified to tell you guys this? And let's just say my entire 401k is comprised of tools. I have bought so many tools over the years of working on cars, either my Datsun or the kit car you see behind me that we've been building for the past year, that I have so many tools and I know exactly what you should probably be buying for your first tools. Starting off, if you're working on your car, probably the first thing that you're going to be doing is either an oil change or if you're modifying, an exhaust. Those are typically the things that you do first. Probably you're in high school and you've never even bought a tool, maybe you're using your dad's tools and he's tired of it. And so you need to actually go buy your own tools. So what are you gonna need to buy? Well, first things first, you gotta get the car in the air. So you need a jack and some jack stands. Now, I'm gonna recommend you don't buy Harbor Freight jack stands, even though these are Harbor Freight jack stands. Harbor Freight doesn't have the greatest reputation for safety, but jack stands, you want to buy high quality jack stands. These are worth buying some expensive ones, even though I got some Harbor Freight ones. We usually use about 6 on the car whenever we jack it up. So go out and buy some nice high quality jack stands. Your life literally depends on it. You do not want these things to fail and the car to fall on you. So go buy some nice jack stands. They are worth the money. Along with that, you're gonna need a jack, and depending on how tall your car is, you might need a low profile jack. Now for this, I actually do use a Pittsburgh Harbor Freight jack. This isn't as critical because you're not underneath the car when you're jacking it. The jack stands are actually what's gonna be holding the weight. You never want to just rely on a jack alone. You definitely wanna make sure you get it up high enough, get some jack stands underneath it, because those should actually be holding the weight. The jack itself, probably not. It's just enough to get it up in the air. A lot of times your car will come with a jack. Now, while it's not a great jack, it's mainly just for changing the tire on the side of the road. You technically can use it. So if you can only afford the jack or jack stands, buy the jack stands first, because those are what your car should be resting on. They're worth investing some money into, and you can always go buy a higher quality jack later. And a low profile jack from something like Harbor Freight or Home Depot will just make your life so much easier, because it is so much easier to lift and lower the car to actually get underneath it. The second thing that you should buy is an impact. This thing I have used probably more than any other tool, and I'm not exaggerating. I use this on every single car that I work on, pretty much doing every single job. This makes working on cars so much easier. I bought this 7 or 8 years ago and I'm still using it today. This thing has held up amazing. This is another thing that you don't really want to cheap out on. I recommend MILWAUKEE every single time. I will always recommend MILWAUKEE and I will always use MILWAUKEE. MILWAUKEE is the best. You can fight me on that. MILWAUKEE, hands down the best. So you're probably thinking, I already have an impact. I use a drill all the time. A drill is not the same as an impact. A drill is totally different than an impact. An impact is for taking items on and off like a socket. This is for putting holes in things. An impact acts as like a rotational hammer. It applies a force while you're taking on and off a bolt, making it really easy to put things on and take things off. A drill applies constant power, allowing you to drill into things, make holes in things, and then put stuff like screws in. This is gonna be better for hex head bolts, and it's usually paired with something like a socket. So you don't necessarily need a drill while working on cars unless you're really messing something up. What I'd recommend is a lot of times Home Depot or Amazon will do a deal that you can get a starter kit of both a drill and an impact for like half price sometimes, and I highly recommend doing that. I'll put some links to these down below in case you're interested in picking these up. These can get a little bit expensive, but they are totally worth it. This thing has lasted me literally 8 years, and I think it will last me probably the rest of my life. This is an investment into working on cars and even just working in general. Now this is an electric impact. As you can see, it runs off of some batteries, so you'll need a battery and charger as well. For bigger jobs, we've started using air impacts and air tools just because we have a big air compressor in the shop now, but we still use the electric one all the time. So highly recommend getting this. It's portable, it's easy, and it is totally worth the money. Again, it is a total investment. Now you can't really use a ratchet without sockets, so next thing you need to get is a nice socket set. As you can see, I have quite a few sockets. This isn't even all the sockets that I have, this is just the ones that I use most of the time. You don't necessarily need these many, but we do find ourselves using a variety of different sockets. I'd recommend getting either a large starter set from something like Home Depot that has like 200 sockets in both metric and imperial. We almost only use metric for almost everything. If you can only afford one set of sockets, I would get a 10 through 19 millimeter and use millimeters, because most cars nowadays have millimeter. The only reason why I wouldn't is if you're mainly working on American cars and older American cars. A lot of even newer American cars use metric bolts and nuts, so I would recommend getting metric in general. Along with that, be sure to get both short and long sockets. You're gonna need these for various situations that you don't even know about yet. But I highly recommend getting one set of each short and long set of 10 millimeter through 19 millimeter, and that should cover most of the things that you're gonna need. Along the lines of sockets, another good buy would be some extensions, some wobbly heads, just some general socket attachments that will allow you to do a little bit more work, get into harder to reach places, because not every bolt is convenient, and that's probably the best way to put it. So get some stuff that makes your life a little more convenient. This stuff's pretty cheap, it's pretty easy to replace, and it's totally worth the money. Now, along with those sockets, let's say you couldn't really afford an impact or you just don't want to buy an impact yet, some basic ratchets are going to do the job just fine. These are some Husky ratchets. This one is a very precise ratchet. It allows you to get a lot of movement from a tiny throw, basically. Along with that, it does have a wobbly head. So again, convenient, hard to reach places. This thing will help out a lot. Along with that, you'll want a basic ratchet, a hard ratchet, something that's not going to have a wobbly head on it. These two are really all that we use when it comes to ratchets. Maybe you want a couple of different sizes, but for the most part, just get a basic set of ratchets that go along with your socket sets. Again, going to Home Depot and just getting one of their Husky starter sets that come with a ratchet, Allen wrenches, everything that you might need with some sockets, totally worth the money, and again, you're gonna use it for probably the rest of your life. The next thing you're gonna need is some wrenches. These are the basic wrenches that you're gonna need. This is a Husky wrench set. This goes from 8 millimeters all the way up to 19 millimeters. Again, that'll pretty much cover most of the bolts that you're gonna be working with on a day-to-day basis. Anything bigger than that, you're gonna be getting into bigger jobs, and you're probably not gonna be starting out with something like that. But for the most part, these wrenches are what you might need, but there are some other wrenches that if you got a little extra budget might make your life, again, a little more convenient, and that's what tools are for. So I'm going to show you some of these others as well. Now, not all wrenches are made equal. Here are two other wrench sets that we use quite often. These are actually Craftsman, and these are actually Quinn. So as you can see, no real brand loyalty when it comes to wrenches, but these are used for different kind of more advanced jobs, or at least they'll make your life a little bit easier. These are called flare wrenches. Basically what they are is instead of only having 4 points of contact, they have 5. These are designed specifically for brass head nuts and bolts. So these are for weaker metals, and you usually find those when working on brake lines. So if you are doing anything with modifying brake lines, repairing brake lines, these are going to be a must-have because they are so easy to strip. These are going to basically make it really hard to strip those. You'll be able to go over the brake line and adjust it. For most stuff, this is going to be overkill. You really only need those four points of contact, but for brake lines, you're going to want the extra point of contact because it's less likely to strip that nut. Super necessary if you're doing that. Otherwise, you could probably hold off on this, but it's just a little bonus if you're buying some wrenches anyway. Back to the Craftsman wrenches. These are pretty much basic wrenches. The biggest difference is on these wrenches. On one side, you have the normal wrench right here. On the other side, you have a ratcheting wrench. So this actually lets you have a really low profile, basically a wrench-like ratchet that you can put over a bolt and just turn like that. Now, this isn't ideal for everything, but this will help quite a bit. These can get a little bit expensive, but I think that they're worth it if you want to have a little bit more convenience. It's always good to have 2 sets of wrenches because sometimes you need to brace it from the other side, or at least have a set of wrenches and a ratchet and a socket so you can brace it from one side and unscrew from the other. Not all bolts are made equal, and sometimes you need 2 sets of everything. Speaking of bolts not necessarily being convenient, some of them don't want to move, and that's why you need a breaker bar. This thing is a solid head. It does swivel back and forth, but it is not ratcheting. This will allow you to get a stuck bolt off. This is going to be great for parts that are under stress. So if you're doing suspension, if you're doing transmission, if you're doing anything like that, sometimes you need a little bit more leverage. Notice that this is much longer than a ratchet. Basically, by having a longer lever arm, you get more torque on the bolt that allows you to get it off easier. Whereas if you're pushing from here, it's going to be way harder to get the leverage you need to get it off. The downside to this, it is a long bar and you can't necessarily fit it everywhere. That's where those extensions and long sockets and angled sockets come into play. But these are relatively cheap. They're hard to break and they're totally worth having, especially if you're working on an older car. If you're working on an older car, especially doing any kind of suspension work or even working on an exhaust that has basically heat cycled so many times that it's hard to get off, this thing is going to be a lifesaver. So you've broken all your bolts, you've taken it all apart and you've put it back together. Now you need to torque everything down to spec. Now you don't necessarily need to do this for everything. In fact, if you have an impact, you'll be able to pretty much attach everything back to normal. But if you're working on critical components like an engine bay, in the suspension, brake lines, even if you're doing an oil change, you're gonna need torque wrenches. These you can set to a specific torque setting, and basically as you re-tighten that bolt, it'll click once it's reached its specific torque setting. This is going to be really important for oil changes specifically, which is probably what you're going to be doing if you're starting out. You will need at least a small torque wrench. We've got 2 sizes. The larger one just makes it a little easier for larger torque specs, but if you're just doing an oil change or something like that, this is a good place to start. How these things work is basically you can set a specific torque setting, and this will be specified whenever you're doing like something like an oil change. Why this is so important is if you under tighten your oil drain plug bolt, then you're gonna leak oil, or even worse, over time it could vibrate itself loose and then you have a sudden full loss of oil, which means you just turned a $100 oil change into a $2,000-$3,000 motor, which is not something that you want to be spending your money on, especially because you did the work yourself, and sometimes insurance doesn't really like that. So this is a total lifesaver when it comes to that. Along with that, you don't want to over tighten it either, because if you over tighten it, you could strip it, and then it's just a total pain next time you do an oil change. You do an oil change every 6 months, so you don't want to make your life harder than it already is. So this is a total 100% buy. I would definitely buy this and use this, especially as one of your very first tools. Honorable mention real quick is a good pair of pliers, actually a couple pair of pliers. These are pretty cheap. With some needle nose, you can kind of fish your way into places. You can work with cotter pins and stuff like that. And with these jaw pliers, you can get a good grip on things. Maybe you've rounded off a bolt or something like that. You might want to use this to hold it down while you unscrew it from the other side. But that's pretty much it. Those are the tools that if you don't buy any other tools for the rest of your life, you will use those when working on cars. Personally, I love my Milwaukee Impact. It's my favorite, and I wish they would pay me to say that, but they don't. So I highly recommend getting a Milwaukee. Even if it's kind of a stretch, it's gonna last you quite a while. I'm gonna put a link to pretty much all the tools that I use, or at least all the tools that I can find down below, so you guys can check them out. We'll be making more videos like this in the future to hopefully help guide you guys through what tools you need to buy when doing specific jobs on cars. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and a comment down below. Let me know what videos you want to see next about certain tools and what type of jobs you're going to be doing on your cars, because odds are I've done it and I know what tools you're going to need for it. And that's going to wrap up this Tool Tuesday, so thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Those smell amazing.
Thanks for the roses.
Whoa!
I can't believe I'm Spider-Man.